first step, I decide which part of the song to do. So this is the conductor score. It has all the instruments listed. As you can see, there are moments, obviously, that you would expect where some instruments aren't playing and more do. I chose to do a part from the end where everyone is playing. And everyone plays from here to the end. That's common for the end of a piece, so it's triumphant. So that was the section we did in Procession of the Nobles, and Dance Bacchanal, same thing. This piece is quite long. It wasn't realistic to consider doing the entire thing, so we did a spot just at the end. So that is step 1. Step 2 is to create a click track. A click track is a series of audio cues used to synchronize sound recordings. So in order to synchronize all of these individual tracks that the students are submitting, they all have to be at the same speed or the same tempo. When we're together in an ensemble, the conductor signals the tempo and the speed that everyone is going to take. But when we're all separate, that is what the click track does. The click track for the string orchestras is a video that I create and post on YouTube for the students to use. Essentially, I record myself playing their part at the designated tempo. BPM is beats per minute, so they know what the metronome is set to. And then they play this recording in their earbuds while they play, out loud into the room and record their own sound. This way, by having the metronome and this YouTube video playing in their earbuds, they can hear the common tempo they need to stay with, but that background sound doesn't interfere with the recording they produce. So, for example, I give them a count off, and then I play their part. Here's an example of that. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and I did it for each instrument. So, for example, here's the violin. This is letters, the rehearsal letters that they're playing, the section of the song. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. So this way, in their ear, they can hear not only the click of the metronome for the steady tempo, but also the intonation and the notes that they need to match in order for us all to match complete as an ensemble when we're together. The click track for symphony had to be different than what I was doing with the string orchestras because, number one, I do not have all of the instruments from the symphony in my apartment, and number two, I knew that there's no way we would be able to have the sound of the timpani, which is those large drums that are copper colored. There's usually around 4 of them, and they're only at the school. There's no chance any student has a set of timpani in their own home. So therefore I knew we would need to create that sound with a computer. And it just so happens that the timpani plays an important role in the rhythm as well as sort of the bass sound and pitch it's a foundation of the chords and the pitch for the piece. So I created this. I typed in each of these notes based on what's in the score. This is the program called Sibelius. It's a music notation software. I created this part, and then I can export an audio recording of it. So it sounds like this. And I sent this audio recording and the image of the music here to each of the students in symphony, and this is what they put in their ear in an earbud, and this is what they played along with, so that they were all playing at the same tempo and playing with the same type of intonation because they could hear these notes in the timpani, which again were the foundation of the chords that they need to match. So this is essentially what was used as the click tracks for symphony for both Dance Bacchanal and the Procession of the Nobles. Now we're at step 3, which is to create a place to compile all of the audio files that students submit. I used GarageBand, partly because I'm most familiar with it and I have access to it. GarageBand is an example of a digital audio workstation, or DAW, a DAW, where you can do audio engineering and combining of tracks. So I discovered that it was most easy to start a new project and then pay attention to selecting the tempo and the time signatures here that match what the students were producing. So if I asked them to set their beats per minute at 100, I would type that here. And if the time signature of the piece was in 4/4 or 5/4, 2/4, whatever it was, I could change that here. So by changing this before I set up the new project, it means then the recordings will align with sort of the ruler at the top of the page. And I'll show that in a minute. To wrap up the explanation of step 3, if you look at the top of my project here now, I have my tempo at 130 beats per minute and the meter at 4/4. So by doing that, now this ruler at the top, when I have my playhead here, which is this line, I know this 5 means it's actually measure 5 because it can tell the tempo and the time signature, so how many beats per minute, or per measure rather. And so therefore I know in this student's recording, this sound that they're producing is actually at measure 5 in the music. So that helped to line things up. The smaller metrics here are then each beat of each measure. So this is measure 5, beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4, measure 6, beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4. So once I figured out how to use that, it was very helpful in compiling all of these tracks. Step 4 would probably be bringing all the tracks into the program. So a track, each of these are different tracks, so each of these are different students. For the purpose of this video, I deleted all the names, but originally I did have their names along the side here so that I, could imagine the person that I was listening to and working with. So you can move these tracks. Essentially, I dragged them in here, and you can trim them. So I had to make sure, for example, that they are all started at the beginning. Some students, obviously, when they submit a recording, it had some dead time. So I would look at the sound waves and, trim them where it needed to be trimmed. And then I can move them where they needed to be moved. So that was the first step of compiling all this, was bringing in all of these things. I organized the tracks by instrument and by score order. So this is the order that I see the instruments in my conductor score. It starts with woodwinds here, then it starts with brass here, and then percussion, and then all of the strings are down here. So yeah, so I had all of the tracks in here. As I brought the tracks in, I would line them up. For example, if I had multiple of one instrument, I would bring one in, line it up, and then the next one I brought in, I would make sure it lined up with the same instrument. If they're off, it's very noticeable. So here are the trumpets. Here's 2 trumpets. Being able to see the sound waves helps a lot. So if I brought this one in, and if I had it off, I mean, this is off a lot. You can see at our ruler, it's off an entire beat of the song. It's going to sound pretty bad. It doesn't sound terrible. It sounds like a round. If it's even just a little bit off, you can see the sound waves. They don't line up, but at least perhaps it's not as terrible. And again, you're hearing this sound now, unfortunately, through the way I'm recording this video. It's not ideal, so the sound quality isn't that high. My apologies, but I think you get the idea. So you can see I took careful attention to line them up. I look at the sound waves, and when they're together, it does sound very clean and nice. And then I would go in and make sure that all the other, I would usually work by section. So here's the brass. I would make sure that they sounded like they were all aligning. So that would be this step of making sure all of the tracks line up in space and time. after making sure all of the tracks had the sound aligned from all the independent students, the next step was to work on the balance of the sound. So there were a couple different elements, or aspects to that rather. As you can see, some students, like for example this violin student, their sound waves are larger, which means it's a louder recording. So either they had their microphone closer to themselves or they were using a higher quality recording device. Compare that to, let's go down here. Well, no, let's stick with another violin. Here's another violinist who recorded the same music, but you can see their sound waves are much smaller. And that means either they used a lower quality recording device or they just had the recording device farther away from their playing. You can see here, for example, that the bass recording here is very small, more likely due to the fact that it's hard for basic recording equipment like a phone to capture the quality of the low bass sound waves. So that might have been part of the problem here. I did, as you can see, essentially double this. I put it in here twice to create double the sound so that it would be heard the same volume as, for example, this cellist who had a stronger, louder recording. So as you can see, for example, this bass player, I had his volume up higher than this cellist because I was essentially just trying to equalize out the original volume of the recordings that the students provided me with. So that was one thing I had to go through and check. And then there was another layer to this. These are moments where you can control the volume at different points in the recording. So, for example, the trombones here, towards the end of the piece, they have a very prominent figure that needs to be brought out. It sounds like this, and again, audio record quality is poor here because of the way I'm recording this, but I think you'll get the idea. So that's an important part to bring out, versus the trumpet at that point is just simply holding a note, or even, even the oboe, I believe, at that point is just holding a note. So we don't need to have that sound be as strong, as the trombone part. Similarly, the violas also had that part, so I brought out the viola part here as well. So that's what these lines are with these dots. It controls the volume. It automates the volume, essentially. I tell the computer, make this louder here, make this softer here. So I went through and did that. The other thing I found out that worked well for the brass, so here's a horn, here's a horn. For the brass, it worked well if I adjusted the ambience. So I essentially rose the ambience level for the brass because the sound quality then, it sounded more like it would in real life. So here I'll give an example with the ambience up, except we'll just hear the trombone. So let's try that again. So you can hear there's an echo sort of sound effect that would happen naturally in a larger room. If I then lowered that to nothing, it would sound like this. So I did that with the brass instruments because it helped make their sound fuller and rounder. The other instruments I found I didn't need to do that with, which makes sense given the nature of the instruments. I also decided at the ending that I wanted to add this pause before the last note. So rather than the last note falling on the beginning of the proper beat where it should be, I knew that in a live performance I would purposely delay that note a little bit just for dramatic effect at the end. So that's what this sounds like with everyone. You can see the beats here that are being played. I'll just play that so you can hear it. So you can hear that the beat originally should have been there, but I essentially cut down the line here for everyone and delayed it a little bit further, knowing that's how I would conduct it in a concert. I left purposely the cymbal resonating in between a bit to sound more realistic. The other thing I did then, I wanted in between each of these chords to vibrate, and for you to feel that vibration of the sound in the air, just like you would in a concert. So that's what all of these yellow adjustments mean. Well, not all of them, but I'll go down here. So you can see all the strings here. I have them all set to reverb here. So right now this yellow line you're viewing is the reverb setting. So I did not have that on for most of the song, because then you hear too much echo and it can sound like the notes are off. So instead I added it just at the end here as needed for each instrument, and that way you could hear the reverb in between each of the notes as they're played. So for example, let's see if I can use this violin as an example. So if I got rid of the reverb, so if I drug these little lines down, hear it without reverb, just the violin. So there is some resonance there still, but if I wanted to maximize that to have full effect here for the end of the piece, here it is. Now you can tell that it sounds more like it might in a concert hall. So add that to everyone and it sounds much more realistic. So that is something I also added. So part 6 would be then adding effects to the ensemble sound as a whole. So after I've got all these tracks happening, I added here at the bottom the master track. So here I have options for editing the sound, overall sound of the master track. Here's equalization. So this is what I actually ended up filming to include in the YouTube video. If I click Analyzer here, it'll tell me as this plays what frequencies. You can see here it has frequencies at the different hertz levels. These are lower sounds, these are higher sounds, and you can sort of drag these little dots to either heighten or cut off certain frequencies. So again, this was about trying to make this sound realistic, like it would be in an auditorium or a concert hall. So if I start this at the beginning, so you can see a lot of the lower sounds here. I'm going to put the volume back up and mess around with dragging these dots so you can hear how it changes the sound. And again, audio quality isn't the best, but you'll get the idea. So you can see it really does change the sound a lot. So I spent a lot of time, especially as I added more tracks in, listening to it again and again and again and making slight adjustments. I would listen with headphones, I would listen with just my computer speakers, I would listen with a Bluetooth speaker, and just try and make sure that on all the devices that people listen to it, it will sound balanced and good. You could always also mess with things like with these high, mid, low ranges, compression. I am no professional audio engineer. There's probably much more I could be doing with this, but this is the extent of which I had time for and knowledge of. So I think of it almost like editing a photo, where you're bringing out, you know, I'm a visual person, so bringing out the low, middle, or high ranges of the sounds, just like you would of the colors or the brightness levels. That's essentially what all of this is. So I did enough of this to, you know, just balance out the sound of everyone, make sure the high and the low sounds were balanced. So those were sort of the finishing touches, and then from there I exported this to make it one audio file, and then added it to iMovie, where I added the effects of the titles and things of that nature. So yeah, so that's how it all came together. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the process, and I look forward to sharing with you later the virtual orchestra concerts for both Mendham and Central High Schools. Thank you!